Hi everybody, just wanted to give you one overall farm tour of kind of the highlights of the farm today. When you get to our farm, this is our house. It's the first thing you see when you come to the driveway. We had a builder put it up. We used pieces of a barn we dismantled over a winter, and we finished it ourselves over 2 years' time. So that was our first big project here at this farm. And as you can see, we planted it right in the middle of what used to be a hayfield and a cow pasture. So this is what you see when you pan all around on our farm. So we have a very long driveway. We're way back off the road, which we like quite a bit. So from here, I'm going to take you over toward our greenhouse, which you've seen before, I think, in previous videos. But the garden around it that we planted is a little prettier, I think, than last time you saw it. It's got lots of sunflowers. There's a whole bunch of gladiolus getting ready to bloom. Our blackberries are kind of going crazy this year, so that's good. We'll have lots of jelly, cobbler, and things like that soon. So here's our greenhouse. We don't use it much this time of year. It's more like I use it for bucket storage and washout from my cut flowers. It's so hot in there this time of year. But it's great in February and March and January. So here's a small little patch of branching sunflowers. So these, I generally plant the single stem varieties. These will have multiple blooms. You can see them there at the crook of the leaves where they meet the stem. There's new little blooms starting to form. These will have more than one bloom on each one. The ones I usually plant are single stem pollenless. So the branching ones you can keep cutting off and they keep coming back for quite a while with new buds. Every year we order about 500 gladiolus and plant them in about 150 at a time. These are a bed that I overwintered over just a very deep layer of leaf mulch. And since the winter hasn't been getting as cold, it seems like, anymore around here, then they come back out without any problem. Normally, gladiolus you have to dig up every year and store if you're going to keep them to plant. You have to keep them out of the ground because a freeze will kill them. But so far, these have all survived multiple winters with just a nice thick mulch of leaves chopped up. And here's another bed that we overwintered. And they're getting ready to bloom right now. I sold some this week to the florists. They're a popular flower for florist industry. And, you know, some people really, really like them. Just a nice big spray of them in a clear glass vase. So I find them that they're one of my very favorite flowers. Kind of an old-fashioned flower. My mom really, really liked gladiolus, and so do I. And here's some I planted a little later. See, they're not quite as big yet. Over here we have this tunnel we've built with our pipe bender. And we had kind of a dry spell and we didn't have water over here to water things with. All this stuff should be a little bigger. We have loofah gourds growing on it and little tiny spinning gourds and also cucumbers. So normally by now this tunnel is covered with vines, but not quite so much this year. And then we have some things planted over here, and the weeds are creeping in, and I just hoed that the other day, but I'm going to have to get back out here. You have to stay on top of the weeds, or they quickly get ahead of you. And over here we have what looks like corn, and it is a type of corn, but it's broom corn. So this will be ready in the fall. It gets really pretty tall, about 7 or 8 feet tall usually. It gets really pretty reds and black and browns sprays of seeds, and you can use them in wreaths or you can just put them in a vase, you know, on their own. They're really pretty. We try to plant a lot of native things here and try to do a lot with permaculture and whatnot, and environment that we are just trying to make everything nice. So this here is 2 different types of bee balm or Monarda. And it's a native, and the bees really like it. But this one we're using for cut flowers this year, and it's really got an interesting bud on it. And the other one is not quite blooming yet. But when it is blooming, there's one down here kind of ahead of the game. When it is blooming, it'll look like that. So that's our little bed over here. We also have some pineapple sage, which smells just like a pineapple. It smells really sweet. We have a little bit of fennel, I think, down there, or maybe dill. I forget what I planted. We have a bunch of basil. I use all these things in our arrangements. Back here we've got grapes growing, and they're just kind of something, you know, we make jelly and stuff out of. They're not something we cultivate to sell. We just enjoy eating some grapes. This is our asparagus bed. We have a little series of raised beds here. The asparagus is, you know, done gone for the year, and the little yellow colored things you see in here is cilantro that is actually, it's gone to seed. But we can save these seeds then when they get dried out enough, and they will have new ones to plant for next year. We like to seed save here whatever we can. Over here, although it's gotten a little weedy and I've cut a lot out of it, is lemon balm and mint. So it's like an herbal bed, and this is perennial herbs, so they come back every year. And the lemon balm I include in bouquets, and the mint, and you can also make tea and things out of it. And it all smells really nice. Over here we had lettuce earlier in the season, and now there's just some cauliflower under it, I think. I'm not going to open that one up today, but I honestly should one of these days because I haven't peeked in there in quite a little while. Over here is our vegetable garden. Now this is just, we grow vegetables to can and freeze and just eat fresh. And every year, it's like, oh, we're going to have the best vegetable garden ever. And we used to have a really pretty one until I started growing flowers. And now a lot of my time gets devoted to the flower garden, and this one kind of gets forgot. So my husband's been helping a lot with the vegetable garden this year. We also have some fruit trees here that we are trying something different with. We prune them on around solstice times, and we're attempting to keep them kind of small instead of being very large. Your fruit trees get very large. And the idea is you can get still a fair amount of fruit off of a tree. And apple trees here just do terrible. This is rust. So this comes from a gall on a cedar tree. It's like a fungal thing, I believe. And it just makes the leaves look terrible. None of these trees have produced any fruit yet. This is a big peach tree. But they should be getting big enough here maybe next season to finally get some fruit going. And here's some tomatoes that I started from seed in our greenhouse. We eat a lot of pasta sauce, pizza sauce, salsa. I can the juice so that we can make chili and things in the wintertime. So my husband just recently tied these back up. They were getting kind of big and starting to fall over. And so they have a lot of tomatoes on them already. Ooh, there's one that's getting ripe. And most of the ones I grow here are paste tomatoes because we do use them just for pasta sauce, pizza sauce. So we don't use them for a lot of other things. We don't really eat them fresh too much. Up here we got some peppers. There's just some real tiny little peppers just starting. These are jalapenos. My oldest son really likes those, and so do I. They're pretty good. Down here we have something we've never grown before. My sister-in-law gave them to us. She started them from seed this year. And they're huckleberries. And aren't they pretty? So I believe you have to cook them to use them or turn them into things like jelly and preserves. But they taste similar to a blueberry, is what I've been told. So when they're ripe and ready, we'll have to give them a try. But the plants she grew are very healthy, and they're turning out really well. Oh, here's another pretty tomato I just have to show you. This is a different variety, and it's kind of a variegated tomato. It's got lots of beautiful stripes in it. It's really pretty. So this side of the garden got all weeded and tilled and hoed, and it's really pretty. And the other side of the garden is a different story. We haven't got over there yet. So see, these are carrots, but they're also big bunches of weeds. There are carrots down in there, but there's also grass and weeds and things like that. We got some kale and some lettuce up there. Down here we got some dill, which I do use in arrangements sometimes, but I also use it in, you know, pickles and whatnot. Makes a pretty little flower on top. Smells, you know, dilly. We've got some beans on here that I didn't know we had. I'm gonna have to be picking beans. Those are just green beans. We eat them fresh, and we also can them. We got some Swiss chard up here that the bugs have been gnawing on a little bit. Got a few sunflowers up at the top, just because what's a vegetable garden without some flowers in it too. And down here we have lima beans, but I don't think any of those are on yet. They are just starting to bloom, it looks like. And those are delicious canned. We really like those. We've got some eggplant up here that the bugs love to chew on. Some of them are getting nice and big. We usually use diatomaceous earth and sprinkle on all the leaves, which is kind of an organic pesticide basically, and it's just like naturally like silica sort of crystally things, and it scrapes the bugs, and then they can't live any longer. So that works on some pesty things in the garden, but not all. But every time it rains you have to reapply it, and I have missed a couple applications. And see, some of these eggplants are just getting eaten up by bugs, while other ones are doing fairly well. We got some Chinese cabbage. And then down here we have squash and pumpkins that are just starting to come out and kind of finally take off. They should fill in this whole area over time. And then we have all different varieties of pumpkins. We have really big ones. We have the miniature ones. Just gives us something to look forward to when autumn comes. And then over here, we still need to weed more. These are Brussels sprouts that I grew from seed in our greenhouse. And they haven't yet sent up their middle stalk. They get a big, crazy stalk. They get really tall, and then the little Brussels form where all the branches are. And then this row is also Brussels sprouts, but they got planted a lot later, and they are filled in with weeds, so we got to get on that, or else we won't have enough Brussels sprouts. We'll just have weeds. Then down there is more pumpkins, more squash. But that's basically our vegetable garden. There's some corn up there that's not really doing too great this year. It should be real tall by now. It's just awfully dry for some amount of time. It's not very happy. Now this one is hilled up, if you'll notice these hills. My husband built a tiller out of old disc parts. That was a broken disc, and he made it so it hills up the soil so you can plant on a raised sort of bed. It helps the soil not dry out as fast underneath the raised parts, so the roots can spread out and get a nice drink. It's just an experiment. Everything it seems like we do here is a lot of times on experiment level, and if it works, well, we do it again, and if it doesn't work, then we try something new next time. So that was the vegetable garden. Now we're going back past the barn. There's our giant elderberry, one of them. That's been there as long as I can remember. And it's really pretty, but it's enormous. So it's got its pretty elder flowers, which smell really nice. And then when those fall off, after they're done blooming, it turns into this, which is what the berries come on from. And the berries are really small, but you can make jelly and jam, syrup, all kinds of stuff out of them if you can beat the birds to them, that is. The birds love the elderberries. So there's our really attractive water tanks, and when you have a farm, you have to find a way to move water. So we have pumps and we have irrigation, because you can't depend on it raining, because it might not rain for weeks at a time. Sometimes in the summer it gets really hot, and then all the plants you're trying to grow get really sad. So here's our flower garden. And currently, I'm in the process of weeding this part, weeding that part. Everything's, doing pretty well out here. We're kind of between harvests on some of these things right now. I just sold a big batch to the florist earlier this week, and it's only Tuesday, so we had market not that many days ago, and I really make this garden work. I get every bloom out of it I can. Now, so these are all sunflowers, and they're real happy and they're real pretty. And they should be just a couple more weeks and they'll be ready. Over here is more Gladiolus that we overwintered. And some of these did bloom, and they are beyond selling to anybody. But I think I'm going to cut them off later and put them in the house. They're so pretty, plus the bees like them. Oh, that's a pretty one. That kind of lime green, ruffly one. I forgot about those from last year. That color is always really ruffly. And we have these kind that are two-tone, which is a really interesting variety. And then we have all this broom corn. We planted that out here, so in the fall, that'll give us quite a harvest of that. Over here we have some zinnias, that I see are starting to bloom. We have 4 rows of zinnias here, and they're about, the beds are about 75 feet long, I believe. Over here we have Amaranth. I think it's Hopi Red Dye is the name of it. It gets tall and it gets like a flower spike on it, real pretty. Especially when it gets towards like September, October. We have some, I think they're African marigolds. They're not like the little short ones you get that are bedding plants. They get really tall with a really big bloom on top. Here we have some weeds. And I'm trying to think, but I don't know what else is in there. I just hoed this the other day. I'm not seeing any plants. That's the way it goes sometimes. That's some more amaranth. It's kind of spotty though. That purple color flower is what's in there, but it's a different kind. There was a Love Lies Bleeding, I think is what I had planted in there, but it doesn't look like it came up very thickly. Down here, the rest of the bed is basil. And like I said, we use a lot of that in arrangements because it smells good, and also because it's just such a pretty green color. There's a little bit more over here in this bed that's a little taller. And then these over here are straw flowers. They're not blooming just yet. There's some more amaranth, and the leaves in that are just so pretty. That deep red, and they're purple and green mixed, and they're just a really lovely leaf to look at. A few more marigolds. This whole bed is Celosia. I believe it's the chief variety, which is those, if you've ever seen them, they kind of look like a big brain. They get one big bloom on top. And I think these are chief persimmons, so they're like a persimmon-y orange gold kind of color. And then this bed was some herbs. And believe it or not, they're in there, and they are growing, but they are growing really slow. And that's another job I need to do. They need to get mulched and they need to get weeded. There is an endless amount of jobs here at the farm that are always waiting to get done. This is Dianthus. It's really pretty. It's like an heirloom carnation. They are just getting ready to open. Let's go down here and see if I see any. I thought there was one the other day when I walked out here that looked like it might pop open any day now. Well, there's one starting to peek open, but it's not open just yet. And this bed I see down here, it's all weedy. I got to about here 2 days ago and I got interrupted. I think it was time to make dinner or time to do something. And so that's where I stopped weeding. Well, that side's super unhappy. And this side is very happy. So I need to finish that job too. Down here we have some Snapdragons. They're on their second cutting. So if you cut them down to ground level, they come back out from the ground up. And you can have another harvest or two. Over here is what's left of our sunflowers. That was our first batch that we had overwintered under tunnels and hoops, I think I showed you all before. So those are single stem pollenless florist sunflowers, so they do not come back. Once you cut them, they're like a one and done, that's it. But now I need to go and cut them all off at the base, and they're planted in landscape fabric. They got some weeds growing through it, so I'm gonna have to cut them all off at the base and pull up the landscape fabric. Here's some pretty Rudbeckia. They're just a black-eyed Susan family, just a little bit bigger variety than the traditional kind you grow in like a nice planting bed. Then we have our Bells of Ireland bed, which is at different intervals. I had to sow this 2 times to get them to come up. Some of them didn't come up at all. They're kind of a finicky seed, so they like being cold. I planted some way back, when it was still frosty out. And some of them came up and some of them didn't, but they're really pretty flower. And they smell kind of like sour apples. So they're well worth all the trouble, but you have to go through the trouble sometimes to make them work. So when those finish filling in, that'll be nice. Over here is Feverfew. It smells real nice. It's like an herbal plant, and you can overwinter this as well. It'll come back in this area. And it's just a pretty little filler flower. And if you cut it off the same as the Snapdragons at the base, it comes back out on some side shoots and you get several harvests out of it. But it's just a happy little, almost daisy-like flower. It looks real pretty in with things. Down here's a bed that needs tilled one more time and replanted. It's done with what was in it before was stock, and that's already done and out of season. So it's time to plant that with something new. This is our Bupleurum, which was prolific this year. We had a ton of it, and it was great, and we sold most of it at the market and to some florists, and it sends out a second or third growth spurt out of what you cut off, but I'm not yet determined if I think it's worth keeping it. See, these are like new ones. But they're not as nice as the original blooms, so I'm not sure they're worth this whole bed space being used up to just try to get a second cutting. Time will tell. This is my Nigella bed. I'm so happy about this one this year because I've only grown Nigella one other time. It was in a real small little amount, and this all worked, and it turned out so well this year. So Nigella, some people call it love in a mist. It's this pretty little, they come out and they're blue and they're white and they're just a really pretty little flower. And these are great for growing for market because if you're busy or you miss them and you don't get to cut the flower, then it sends out these really interesting seed pods. So if you miss cutting them for whatever reason, then you still have a chance to cut all these seed pods off. And these seed pods will dry. You can use them in wreaths in the winter. You can sell them fresh as they are because they're kind of really interesting looking. You don't get many blue flowers. There's not a whole lot of blue flowers. So they're always really pretty when you come out with a variety of something that's blue. Now over here, this is kind of another experiment. These are dahlias, but they're dahlias from seed. They're not like the big dinner plate, gorgeous, gorgeous dahlias. They're still very pretty. But I haven't grown these, at least not in this big of an amount before. So we're trying them this year to see how they go. And I've weeded them 2 or 3 times now. We've got them mulched. And so far they look really happy and really healthy. And once they start blooming, we'll see what they look like. But currently they're just hanging out and getting taller. There's some Nigella in there that snuck in at some point and self-seeded itself. And then down here we have yet more basil. That's Aromato basil. And it's a pretty purple color. Smells kind of like licorice. And it looks really good when you put it in with bouquets. This whole row is Sweet Annie. And it gets really tall, as you can see. These actually came up and self-seeded on their own over by the barn in the vegetable garden before we plowed the vegetable garden. And I just moved them over here and they took right off, because honestly, they're kind of like a weed. They grow really easy, really tall, really happy without much effort at all. Now, these will get tiny little yellow flowers on them. They don't really look like anything. But if you cut them and dry them, then you can make wreaths and all kinds of things out of them in the wintertime, and they smell really wonderful. It smells really wonderful even now. I sometimes just walk through here and grab a handful of it and then, you know, give it a sniff. It smells so good. And that holds that smell even after it's dry. And I sometimes cut off the green pieces even though they're not really technically ready yet, and tuck them down in a bouquet where you're not going to see them, just to have the nice scent that goes along with it. This bed is forget-me-nots, which I'm basically done harvesting, but the bees have been so happy to be on them that I was letting them go for a little bit before I cut them off. Because the bees just love these flowers for some reason. I think it has to do with their color, and it has to do with their simple form, that they're easy to get down into for the honeybees. So we'll let them go a little bit longer, and then eventually we'll get rid of them and plant something else in that bed. Here's our first real batch of planted zinnias. These were the first ones I planted out this year. They got started in the greenhouse. They are just now starting to bloom. But they're just in assorted variety of colors. And then we have the problem here every year of the Japanese beetles. You can put the traps out, but some people say that brings more of them. It just, nothing seems to get rid of them. The only thing you can really do, it seems like, is go around in the morning or the evening and knock them off into a bucket of soapy water, which is not a fun job, but if you don't get rid of them, or at least diminish their population some, then you're going to have like double the amount next year, which is no fun. We have more dahlias. I don't know how they got separated from their other bunch. I think sometimes when I'm out here transplanting, I get a little tired. And this has gotten a little bit weedy, but tucked down in here, I'm gonna have to get the weeds out, but tucked down in here is eucalyptus. And it grows really slow. So I think that's something for future use. I'm going to try it over winter under a hoop. So in the spring, it's got a head start. Here's another bed of Celosia. We have double of that down here. It's the same variety, just on 2 different beds. And the variety it is Pampas Plume. And it just gets real pretty feathery blooms on it. And you cut them off and it grows new ones. It just keeps regenerating for quite a long time throughout the growing season before it's finally worn out. And it's so many pretty colors. It's these reds and these yellows, burgundy, really pretty. We got some paper daisies, which I've never grown before. I keep pinching off the blooms, hoping the plants will get thicker and branch out better, which they have been. They get a tiny little paper-like flower on them that just looks like a daisy, but they're really cute. So far, the ones I've seen are really pretty, but I do need those plants to get bigger. So they're kind of just a trial this year. That's why they're planted in a small little quantity, because I wasn't sure what they would do. Then we have a nice big bed of statice, which is a great filler flower. It gets a real papery bloom on it. Comes in a variety of colors, usually shades of lavender and purple and yellow, white. Sometimes there's like a kind of weird mix. It's like a peachy color. This stuff dries really well too. If you gather a bunch of it towards evening when it's been hot on it all day and there's no moisture left on it, and you hang it up somewhere kind of dimly lit that's warm and dry, and it'll dry for you and stay that color for quite a long time, probably several years, as long as you don't set it in direct sunlight. It's a really pretty dried flower. Here's another great one for drying, and this is straw flowers. So these already feel like paper when they're out here growing on the plant, and they come in all different colors, but see, they're so pretty. And I like to save these. If you hear them, they sound papery already. They're practically dry when they come out on the stem. I like to pour resin and things over the dried heads and make jewelry and magnets and all kinds of stuff. So we have a little bed of those. Down there is a few more Snapdragons that haven't quite got ready to bloom yet. These two beds were a failure this year. I planted seeds in them, and then it got really dry, and we didn't have a way to irrigate just yet. We just figured that our irrigation system out after the dry spell this year, and they just didn't come up. So I got to weed these two big long beds because I'm wasting space and plant something else in them, because you don't want wasted space in your garden. This is more Celosia. This is a different variety though. I think this is Kramer's, and it gets kind of like a coxcomb sort of plume on top. You can see it down in there. Just a wavery, pretty pop of color. Here's one over here that's bigger. That one's probably nearly ready. A little more status. We got some asters down there. They're not ready to bloom yet. I just weeded those yesterday. We got to get everything mulched down here. We have a bunch more basil. And then the last few beds down here are kind of in a transitional period. We have some that I tilled back under that were done and need replanted with something else. We have some that need weeded because they have sunflowers coming up. We have a big bed, another one down there of zinnias, because they're a large seller with the flower bouquets. People love zinnias, and I do too. They're just such pretty flowers. So this bed needs weeded. This is calendula, and that's just a pretty orange pot marigold. And then we have some more sunflowers growing down there. So that's our market garden for growing flowers. Just a pretty spot, as long as you can keep the weeds out, that is. And this used to be my parents would call it our little hayfield. It was our little hayfield. We have a bigger hayfield back there that still gets mowed for hay. We have a big one down in the front that still gets mowed for hay. But this one we decided, since it was the little one anyway and you didn't get very many bales of hay off of it, that we would turn it into, this could be a good spot for our flower garden. I'm going to climb through the fence here and show you. This was our compost pile. We have one by the house that we dump our food scraps and vegetable clippings and stuff in, but this one was like yard waste, like old flower heads and old hunks of grass and hay and things we just need to get rid of. Well, I'd been turning it all winter. I turned it, I'd get the tractor out and get it. You have to keep flipping compost or it stops working. You have to keep it hot inside. And it has to be layered with green and brown so that it keeps staying hot. Well, I got sidetracked, and now it's just kind of turned into a reseeded flower garden. So I haven't bothered it. I figure, well, when the season's over, I'm going to chop everything down and it'll be already on the compost pile. But it's honestly, I think it's kind of pretty right now, so we'll just let it do its thing. So it's got a lot of amaranth, there's some tomatoes, there's some broomcorn, there's some black-eyed Susans. And hey, it might be prettier than the flower garden by my house. So we're just going to leave it alone for a little bit. And then let's go over this way. I want to show you, I think, one more thing here. We have our hammocks hanging there. That's when you get a little too tired, so you go lay down and take a break. And then we named our farm Broken Oaks because we're always losing oak trees. We had some really pretty oak trees. Oh, there's a groundhog. I don't know if y'all saw him or not. He lives in this giant wood pile, which we have very many intentions of splitting and getting rid of, but that's another job we haven't quite got around to yet. I mean, it's an enormous wood pile. So I saw, baby possums in there this spring. There's goodness knows what's living in there. I guess we'll find out when we start splitting it. But we lose oak trees like constant. We've lost 2 or 3 just in our yard over there in the past year, just our big old oak trees. And we have some really nice big old oak trees here, but they're always breaking off, so we kind of just have to do what we can, and we plant new trees all the time, but it's not the same as our pretty old trees, you know. This is what I was going to show you. This is a series of berms, which is kind of like a series of ditches with rises like hills. So it's a permaculture experiment. So what it is the ditches, you probably can't see them because everything is grown in now since it's midsummer. There's like a hill over here, and then there's a ditch, but then there's another hill, and then there's a ditch. So the idea is the hills let the water run down into the ditch because this is on a hillside. So it keeps you from having runoff go straight into your creek. It's a good way for water management to work. So the stuff on the hills gets its wonderful drinking water out of the ditch water that sits in there for just a little bit. It drains a lot slower. So the stuff on the ditch can have real nice deep roots, and it can have a nice drink. And what we have growing out here is all kinds of native plants. I got a native seed mix to go in it. This is mountain mint, and it's not quite blooming yet. When it's blooming, this place is swamped with honeybees. So it's really pleasant to walk out here and just listen to them work. And then it looks like some kind of spiderwort. I'm not sure what that is. And then out in the midst of all of it, we have pawpaw trees planted. They like to have a little bit of cover from the hot, hot sun until they get to be a certain size. Plus, all of this growth seems to keep the deer from eating them up. So in the winter, I don't typically cut any of this down. I just let the seed pods stand, and then they still end up hiding the pawpaw trees so the deer don't come out and eat them. But in a few years then, we ought to have some decent sized pawpaws on here. But we're always trying to give our pollinators a little help, and this berms and swales really does a good job of that. There's so much different types of wildlife out in there. And it kind of goes around and down, and then at different times of the summer, there's all different things blooming on it. So currently, what's getting ready to bloom all over it is mountain mint. But there's always like a flush of rudbeckia, there's a flush of coneflowers, there's some kind of coreopsis. It's a tick seed that's yellow and gets real tall. It's really pretty. And then we mow trails all around the farm. I do, to just we walk around and we can enjoy all the things. We try to leave the other parts grow up, so there grows up with milkweed and clover and things like that all the bees really like, and it helps them give them a boost. So I think that's kind of the end of the farm tour. But I hope you guys have liked all the little videos and stuff I've been making for you. And I'm always open to questions or, you know, ideas. If you see something that I could be doing that heck I don't even know about, because I grew up on a farm, but as a kid you don't always pay a lot of attention. So there's always things to learn. That's part of life. But I'm hoping everybody gets a little something out of the videos and just enjoys all the pretty things around them. And I know that I do. But I appreciate you watching. Thank you.